Hi everyone. Before watching, please subscribe to our channel, give this video a like and leave a comment. This will help promote this video. Thank you and enjoy watching. The cardboard castle walls were already buckling under the weight of a stuffed dinosaur. Sweat trickled down my forehead, mingling with the dust motes dancing in the afternoon sun. 3-year-old Leo, oblivious to the chaos, triumphantly declared, "Look, Daddy, my T-Rex conquered the kitchen." I chuckled, wiping my brow with the back of my hand. Conquering was definitely the right word for it. The kitchen, once a pristine showcase in the brochure, now resembled a battlefield strewn with half-unpacked boxes and rogue toys. It was a far cry from the cramped apartment we'd just left behind, a place that held too many echoes of a life that had crumbled. This new house, a low-slung ranch in a quiet suburban neighborhood, was a fresh start. A promise whispered on sunny afternoons spent house hunting with Leo bouncing in his car seat. Green lawns, friendly neighbors waving from porches, and a backyard big enough for epic dinosaur hunts. It all seemed so idyllic. "Hey, champ," I said, hoisting Leo onto my hip. "Let's clear this moat before your T-Rex gets stuck." He giggled, his face a roadmap of smeared cookie crumbs and pure joy. "Moat? Like in the princess story?" "Exactly." I grinned, maneuvering around a particularly stubborn box. "But princesses don't have T-Rexes for knights, do they?" Leo shook his head, his blonde curls bouncing. "Nope. T-Rexes are too big to wear shiny armor." We deposited the box in the living room, joining a growing pile of its brethren. The house was still mostly empty, a hollowness mirroring the one I felt inside. But there was a peace in the silence, a sense of possibility that hadn't existed before. Suddenly, a clap of thunder boomed outside, rattling the windows. Leo squealed, burying his face in my shoulder. "Whoa there, buddy," I soothed, surprised by the intensity of the storm that had seemingly materialized out of nowhere. Rain lashed against the windows, drumming a frantic rhythm. "Just a little thunder, remember?" Leo peeked out, his eyes wide. "Lightning? Daddy, did you see the lightning?" I peered outside. The sky was an angry grey, streaks of light splitting the gloom with each crackle. But before I could respond, the lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. Leo let out a small whimper. "No light, Daddy." "It's okay," I assured him, pulling a box of flashlights from a nearby pile. "Storm knocked out the power, but we have these." The flashlight beam stabbed at the shadows, carving a small circle of light around us. Leo giggled, chasing the beam across the wall. "Look, Daddy, the light monster." I smiled, a genuine one this time, the first true smile in weeks. Maybe this storm, this disruption in the carefully controlled plan of the day, was a good thing. A baptism, washing away the past and leaving only the promise of a new beginning. Maybe, just maybe, this new world, even shrouded in darkness, held a light brighter than any thunderstorm. The storm raged all night, a low growl rumbling like a restless beast outside. Inside, nestled under a mountain of blankets on the living room floor, Leo slept soundly. But sleep eluded me. Every flash of lightning, visible even through closed eyelids, sent a jolt of nervous energy through me. It wasn't just the storm. Leo kept muttering about lightning in his sleep, a word that had become his new obsession. It started innocently enough, his fascination with the first thunderstorm we'd witnessed in the new house. But lately he'd point at random spots in the room, a dreamy look in his eyes, and declare, "Lightning there, Daddy. See it?" At first, I dismissed it as vivid dreams sparked by the storm. But tonight, a new unease prickled at my skin. The memory of Mrs. Henderson, our kind but perpetually worried neighbor, offering a cup of sugar earlier that day, wouldn't leave me alone. "Just a heads up, dear," she'd said, her voice hushed. "There's been some talk lately about a strange man going around the neighborhood at night. Seems he takes pictures of children through their windows." My gut clenched. Pictures? Is there anything the police can do? Mrs. Henderson shook her head. "Nothing concrete. Just keeping an eye out, you know." Now, lying in the fitful darkness, her words echoed ominously. Could Leo's constant talk of lightning be more than just a dream? A deafening crack of thunder split the night, followed by a long, illuminating flash that seemed to linger. I instinctively looked towards Leo, my heart pounding. His face, bathed in the fleeting light, was serene. But then his eyelids fluttered open, and he mumbled, "Lightning in my room again, Daddy. Scary." Panic clawed at my throat. Was he referring to the actual storm or something else? I forced myself to remain calm. "Just a storm, buddy," I reassured him, my voice hoarse. "No lightning inside. Go back to sleep." He snuggled closer, his tiny hand instinctively reaching for mine. "Promise, Daddy." "Promise," I choked out, a hollow ache settling in my stomach. The warmth of his hand felt like a lifeline in the ever-growing darkness. As the night wore on, sleep finally claimed me, fitful and plagued by nightmares of shadowy figures and flashes of light. When I woke up to the weak morning sun filtering through the curtains, a heavy sense of dread hung in the air. Leo, however, was his usual chirpy self. "Good morning, Daddy. Did you see the lightning show last night? It was amazing." I stared at him, a million questions swirling in my head. But before I could voice any of them, the doorbell rang. My stomach lurched. Who could it be this early? My pulse hammered against my ribs as I approached the door, peering through the peephole. Relief washed over me momentarily. It was just Mrs. Henderson, a basket of muffins clutched in her hand. But the relief was short-lived, replaced by a cold, nagging suspicion. "Good morning, dear," she chirped, her usual cheer tinged with a hint of worry. "Didn't mean to wake you so early, but I figured some warm pastries might be a welcome sight after such a storm." "Thanks, Mrs. Henderson," I mumbled, opening the door and accepting the basket. "That's very kind of you." She shuffled inside, casting a curious glance around the living room. Leo's still sleeping. "Just woke up," I said, ushering her in. Leo stumbled in, rubbing his eyes sleepily. "Good morning, Mrs. Henderson," he chirped, his usual infectious energy dimmed slightly. "Good morning, young man," she replied, offering him a warm smile. "Did you sleep well despite all the noise last night?" Leo tilted his head, a thoughtful frown creasing his brow. "There was noise." "The storm, dear," Mrs. Henderson explained, kneeling down to his level. "Loud thunder and bright lightning, remember?" Leo's eyes widened. "Oh, right. The lightning show." He looked at me, his voice taking on an excited tone. "Daddy, did you see the lightning last night? It was everywhere, even in my room." My breath hitched. Mrs. Henderson's eyes darted towards me, a flicker of concern crossing her face. I forced a smile, the weight of suspicion growing heavier. "He seems to have a vivid imagination," I said, trying to sound casual. "He keeps talking about lightning even when there isn't any." "Kids, huh?" Mrs. Henderson chuckled, but the sound lacked its usual warmth. "Always keeping us on our toes." The conversation continued for a few more minutes, the air thick with unspoken questions. Mrs. Henderson's concern about the lightning incident was palpable. Finally, she excused herself, promising to drop by another time. After she left, I knelt down in front of Leo, his innocent blue eyes staring up at me. "Buddy, I began, my voice trembling slightly. Remember you said you saw lightning in your room last night? He nodded enthusiastically. Yeah, Daddy. Big and bright, just like the storm lightning. I took a deep breath. What else did you see with the lightning? The question felt heavy, loaded with dread. He furrowed his brow, concentrating for a moment. There was a shadow, Daddy, he whispered, his voice barely above a murmur. It moved with the lightning. My heart hammered in my chest. A shadow. Could it be? No, it was too ridiculous. Must be just another product of his imagination. Still, a knot of unease tightened in my gut. Just a dream, champ, I said, forcing a smile. Sometimes dreams mix things up a bit. He seemed satisfied with that explanation, skipping off to play with his toys. But the image of a shadow dancing with lightning in his room wouldn't leave my mind. Was Leo simply dreaming, or was there something darker lurking in the shadows of our new home? The unsettling conversation with Leo gnawed at me for days. I tried to brush it off, attributing it to his overly active imagination fueled by the storm. However, Leo's persistent talk of lightning shadows kept chipping away at my resolve. Then news broke one morning that sent a jolt of fear through me. A local news report flashed an image of a disheveled man being apprehended by the police. The caption identified him as a suspected child predator caught thanks to a vigilant neighbor noticing him lurking around a house. The details were sketchy, but one phrase sent chills down my spine. Flashing photos through windows. My hands trembled as I reached for the phone. Mrs. Henderson needed to hear this. Mrs. Henderson, I started, voice tight with urgency. Did you ever get any details about that man in the neighborhood? The one taking pictures? A heavy silence followed. Then a shaky sigh came through the receiver. Yes, dear, I did. My heart hammered. What did they say? Her voice was barely a whisper. They said he targeted houses with young children. And, she hesitated, they found a lot of photos on him. Photos taken through windows at night. My stomach lurched. Did they say anything about what the pictures showed? Another long pause, then, no dear. They didn't, but they said they were. Disturbing. I hung up the phone, my mind racing. Could Leo have been? No. The thought was too horrifying to contemplate. But the coincidence was chilling. Later that afternoon, I decided I had to address it directly. As Leo played with his blocks, I sat down beside him, my voice hesitant. Leo, remember you told me about seeing lightning in your room? He looked up, a mischievous glint in his eyes. Yeah, Daddy, it was super cool. Did you see anything else with the lightning besides the shadow? He frowned, thinking for a moment. There was a light, too, like a tiny flashlight. My breath caught in my throat. A flashlight. Are you sure? He nodded sullenly. Aha! It went on and off, just like the lightning. My head spun. Was it possible? Could the lightning Leo saw be flashes from a camera? The thought was unbearable, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. Leo, listen closely, I said, forcing myself to remain calm. Is there anything else you remember seeing in your room? Maybe a person. He stared at me with wide, confused eyes. A person? No, Daddy. Just lightning and the flashlight. Relief flooded me, so intense it almost made me weak. Maybe it was just a wild coincidence. Maybe his imagination had simply run wild after the storm. But the flicker of doubt remained, a tiny ember in the back of my mind. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. My muscles tensed. Who could it be at this hour? With a deep breath, I approached the door. peering through the peephole. My heart plummeted. Standing on the porch was Officer Rodriguez, the same officer who had apprehended the suspect in the news report. He gave me a grim smile. "Mister, your last name? Just wanted to follow up on a lead. Mind if I come in?" My legs felt like lead as I ushered Officer Rodriguez inside. Leo, oblivious to the tension in the air, chirped a cheerful hello and scampered back to his blocks. "Thank you for coming on such short notice, officer," I managed, my voice strained. Officer Rodriguez nodded, his gaze flicking around the room before settling on me. "It's about the recent arrest in the neighborhood. Mister, your last name?" My stomach clenched. "Yes, I saw the news report. Horrible business." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low murmur. "We have reason to believe the suspect may have targeted houses on this street." My breath hitched. Targeted. He seems to have focused on houses with young children, Officer Rodriguez explained, his eyes flickering towards Leo playing in the corner. The image of Officer Rodriguez's grim smile from the peephole flashed in my mind. You think he may have been here?" The officer hesitated, then sighed. "We can't be sure, but there was a tip about a suspicious car seen parked near your house a few nights ago." The days after the storm blurred together in my memory. I don't remember seeing anything unusual. "That's all right," Officer Rodriguez reassured me. "We're just looking into all possibilities." "Did you notice anything strange happening around your house lately? Maybe something your son mentioned?" My heart hammered in my chest. Leo's persistent talk of lightning shadows and flashlight lights echoed in my head. But could I risk putting that image in his mind? He keeps talking about seeing lightning in his room. I stammered, the words catching in my throat. "Even when there isn't a storm." Officer Rodriguez's eyebrows shot up. "Lightning? Can you tell me more about that?" I recounted Leo's descriptions, battling back the rising panic. The officer listened intently, his expression growing grave with each detail. "And did he ever mention seeing a person, maybe with a light?" Shame flooded me. I should have asked Leo directly before Officer Rodriguez did. But the fear of planting the idea in his innocent mind had held me back. He said there was a light, like a flashlight. I admitted, my voice babely above a whisper. Officer Rodriguez exchanged a look with his partner, who had just entered the room unnoticed. A tense silence stretched in the air before the officer finally spoke. "Mister, your last name," he said, his voice serious. "I need you to ask your son a few questions. It's important." Dread coiled in my stomach. There was no escaping this anymore. I had to confront the possibility, however terrifying it was. Taking a deep breath, I knelt down in front of Leo, his bright eyes filled with curiosity. "Leo, honey," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "Remember you've been telling me about seeing lightning in your room?" He nodded eagerly. "Yeah, Daddy. Big and bright, just like the storm lightning." "And did you ever see anything else with the lightning?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. Leo tilted his head, concentrating for a moment. "Aha," he chirped. "There was a shadow, Daddy. It moved with the lightning." Officer Rodriguez, who had been watching intently, leaned forward, his voice gentle. "Leo, can you tell me more about this shadow? Did it look like anything you know?" Leo scrunched his brow furrowing in thought. It was dark and shapeless, like a monster from my bedtime story, but without any eyes. I forced a smile, relief washing over me momentarily. "See, officer, just his imagination." But Officer Rodriguez wasn't convinced. "Leo," he continued, cautiously, "did the shadow ever come close to you. Leo's eyes widened. Sometimes, it would flicker with the light, like it was reaching out. A cold dread gripped my heart. Light, I echoed, my voice barely a whisper. Yeah, Leo said, nodding enthusiastically. A bright light, like a tiny flashlight. It made the shadow go away. The officer's gaze met mine, a flicker of something akin to grim understanding passing between us. Leo, he said, his voice even gentler, did you ever see the person holding the light? My breath caught in my throat. This was the question I'd been dreading. Leo thought for a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then he shook his head. No, Daddy. Just the light. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over me. Disappointment that we hadn't gotten a definitive answer, but also a sliver of desperate hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was another explanation. See, officer, I said, forcing a reassuring smile. He probably just dreamed about the flashlight because of the storm. The officer nodded curtly, but his eyes held a flicker of doubt. Perhaps, he said vaguely. However, it would be best if we kept a close eye on things for the next few days. He explained that they'd be increasing patrols in the neighborhood and advised me to keep them updated if Leo mentioned anything else unusual. They left shortly after, leaving a heavy silence in their wake. As I watched Leo return to his blocks, a million questions swirled in my head. Had someone really been targeting my son? And if so, what could their motive have been? The image of the shadowy figure and the flickering light from Leo's description wouldn't leave me. One thing was clear. The storm had brought more than just rain and lightning. It had unearthed a darkness I hadn't known existed. A darkness that threatened the most precious thing in my life. I had to find out the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. For Leo, I had to face the shadows, even if it meant confronting the monsters that lurked within them. Sleep eluded me that night. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle outside my window sent my heart racing. Leo, blissfully unaware, slept soundly in his room. But the image of the shadowy figure haunted me, its shapeless form a constant reminder of the potential danger lurking in the darkness. The next morning, I decided to take action. First, I called Mrs. Henderson. Mrs. Henderson, I began, my voice tense. It's me again. Oh, dear, she said, her voice laced with concern. Everything all right? Not really, I confessed, and proceeded to recount my conversation with Officer Rodriguez. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before Mrs. Henderson finally spoke. That's terrible, but at least they caught that awful man. They haven't confirmed anything yet, I said, my voice heavy with worry. But they're looking into it. Well, you keep me posted, she said resolutely, and if there's anything I can do to help. Thank you, Mrs. Henderson, I said, touched by her offer. I really appreciate it. Next, I tackled the daunting task of talking to Leo. Sitting him down at the kitchen table, I tried to choose my words carefully. Leo, honey, I began, forcing a smile. Remember Officer Rodriguez from yesterday? He nodded enthusiastically. The nice policeman. He wanted to make sure you're feeling safe, I said, my voice gentle. So, I wanted to ask you one more time about the lightning you saw in your room. Leo's brow furrowed. Lightning? Yes, I prompted. Did you ever see anything else with the lightning besides the shadow? He thought for a moment, then shook his head. Just the shadow, Daddy. And sometimes it made a whooshing sound like wind. Whooshing sound? I echoed, trying to control the rising panic in my voice. Could the whooshing sound be the shutter of a camera? Yeah, Leo continued, oblivious to my internal turmoil. Like when you open a present too fast. He giggled at the memory. I forced a smile, the image of a predator taking pictures of my son flashing before my eyes. Interesting, I said, trying to sound casual. And did this whooshing sound happen whenever you saw the lightning? He shrugged. Maybe not all the time. Sometimes the shadow just moved without any sound. The uncertainty in his answer provided a sliver of hope, a possibility that his lightning and whooshing sound were indeed just figments of his imagination. But the fear still lingered, a dark cloud hanging over our newfound life in this seemingly idyllic neighborhood. "All right, champ," I said, trying to inject some cheer into my voice. "How about we go outside and play? Maybe ride your new bike a bit." Leo's face lit up. "Bike? Can we go all the way to Mrs. Henderson's?" Relief washed over me. It seemed the conversation hadn't completely shaken him. "Of course," I said, a small smile playing on my lips. "Let's go see Mrs. Henderson and maybe have some cookies." As Leo raced towards his room to get his helmet, a newfound determination solidified within me. I would protect my son, no matter what darkness lurked in the shadows. And if there was a monster out there, I would find it, even if it meant turning this quiet suburban street into a battleground. The crisp autumn air whipped through my hair as I pedaled alongside Leo on his new bike. We were a picture of normalcy, a happy father-son duo cruising down the suburban street. But beneath the surface, a storm of worry raged within me. Every parked car, every passing figure cast a suspicious shadow in my eyes. Reaching Mrs. Henderson's house, we were greeted by a warm smile and the enticing aroma of freshly baked cookies. As Leo devoured his treat, I discreetly pulled Mrs. Henderson aside. "Anything new on the neighborhood front?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She shook her head sadly. "No, dear. The police haven't released any information yet, but they did say they're keeping a close eye on things." Do you think it could be connected to Leo's descriptions?" I stammered, guilt gnawing at me for putting the idea in her head. Mrs. Henderson placed a comforting hand on my arm. "It's possible, dear, but we can't jump to conclusions. Children's imaginations can be quite vivid, you know." I nodded, desperately clinging to that sliver of hope. "That's what I keep telling myself," I said. "But some of the details—" "Yes," she sighed, her voice laced with concern. "The shadow, the light. It's unsettling." We fell into a tense silence, the weight of the unspoken worry hanging heavy between us. Finally, Mrs. Henderson spoke again, her voice stronger now. "Listen, dear," she said, her eyes locking with mine. "Whether it's connected or not, we have to be vigilant. We need to look out for each other, especially the children." A sense of gratitude washed over me. Mrs. Henderson wasn't just a friendly neighbor, she was an ally. "I completely agree," I said, a newfound resolve firming in my voice. "We can't let fear paralyze us. We have to be proactive." "Exactly," she said, nodding vigorously. "Let's keep an eye on our windows at night. Maybe even invest in some security cameras." We discussed practical measures for a while longer, a plan slowly taking shape. As dusk began to settle, casting long shadows across the street, I knew this was just the beginning. The idyllic facade of our neighborhood had been shattered, replaced by a sense of unease. But with Mrs. Henderson by my side, I felt a flicker of hope. We weren't alone in this. We would protect our children, our homes, and our newfound sense of community, no matter what darkness lurked in the shadows. Days turned into weeks, a tense calm settling over our neighborhood. The police investigation remained shrouded in secrecy, leaving a gnawing uncertainty in its wake. But we, the concerned residents, had taken action. Security cameras sprouted like unwelcome mushrooms on houses, their blinking red lights a constant, watchful presence. One sunny afternoon, while Leo played in the backyard with Mrs. Henderson's grandchildren, a knock on the door shattered the fragile peace. My heart pounded as I opened the door to see Officer Rodriguez standing on the porch, a grim expression etched on his face. "Mister, your last name," he said, his voice serious. "May I come in?" Usher him inside, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. "Of course, officer." "What's wrong?" "We have news about the investigation," he said, his gaze flickering towards the backyard where children's laughter echoed. "Would you like me to wait until—" "No," I interrupted, my voice hoarse. "Tell me now." Officer Rodriguez sighed and pulled out a folder from his briefcase. "We've been going through the evidence recovered from the suspect's apartment, and," he hesitated, a flicker of sympathy crossing his eyes. "We found a memory card containing disturbing images." My breath hitched. "Images? What images?" "Thankfully," Officer Rodriguez continued, "none of the images seem to be from your house. However, we did find several photos taken from windows at night, targeting houses with young children." Relief flooded me, so intense it almost left me weak in the knees. "Oh, thank God," I whispered, collapsing onto the nearest chair. However, the officer continued, his voice grave. "We also found a video on the card. It appears to be a security camera recording from a house a few streets over." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The video shows a man, matching the suspect's description, approaching a window at night. A moment later, a bright light flashes, and the figure scurries away. A cold dread crept up my spine. A bright light. I echoed, the memory of Leo's description flashing before my eyes. "Yes," Officer Rodriguez confirmed. "We're analyzing the video now, but it's a strong possibility that the suspect was taking pictures with a camera equipped with a flash." My heart hammered in my chest. It wasn't just a figment of Leo's imagination. The lightning and the flashing light were real. The predator had been here, lurking in the shadows. "What about the house in the video?" I asked, a newfound urgency in my voice. "Are the children all right?" "Thankfully," Officer Rodriguez said, "we were able to identify the house and speak to the family. They haven't noticed anything unusual, but we've advised them to be extra vigilant." A wave of relief washed over me, followed by a surge of anger. This predator had preyed on innocent children, violating their sense of security in their own homes. "What's going to happen now?" I asked, my voice tight with a mix of relief and fury. "We're building a case against the suspect," Officer Rodriguez assured me. "The video evidence is a significant development. We'll continue our investigation and keep you updated." He offered a reassuring nod before leaving, his visit leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Standing by the window, I watched Leo play in the fading sunlight. The danger may have passed, but the scars remained. This quiet neighborhood would never look the same again. The storm may have subsided, but the shadows it cast would linger, a constant reminder of the darkness that threatened to creep in, and the strength of the community that rose to fight it. The fight for our children's safety was far from over, but at least now, we were facing it together. Months bled into a year, the initial terror replaced by a watchful vigilance. Security cameras remained a permanent fixture on houses, a silent pact between neighbors to protect their little corner of the world. Leo, thankfully, seemed mostly unaffected by the ordeal. His childhood innocence remained largely intact, the lightning shows relegated to a distant memory. One crisp autumn evening, the doorbell rang as I was putting away groceries. Opening the door, I was surprised to see Officer Rodriguez standing on the porch, a familiar smile on his face. "Officer Rodriguez," I exclaimed, relief and a hint of surprise washing over me. "It's good to see you. Come in." "Thank you, mister. Your last name," he said, stepping inside. "Just wanted to drop by and see how you and Leo are doing." "We're doing well. Thanks for asking," I replied, ushering him into the living room. Leo's in his room, building something amazing with Legos. "Good to hear," Officer Rodriguez said, his gaze sweeping the room before settling back on me. "Actually, there's something I wanted to talk to you about." I gestured towards the couch. "Have a seat." A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. Officer Rodriguez's visit felt unexpected, a break from the routine check-ins that had become infrequent in recent months. "It's about the case," he began, his voice taking on a serious tone. "The one involving the predator." My heart hammered in my chest. "The case?" I echoed, bracing myself for bad news. "There's been a development," Officer Rodriguez continued. "The suspect, he's been offered a plea deal." Relief flooded me, so intense it almost left me breathless. A plea deal? Did that mean he'll be serving significant jail time? Officer Rodriguez confirmed, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. "He won't be harming anyone for a very long time." A wave of emotions washed over me: relief, gratitude, a flicker of anger for the terror he'd inflicted. That's amazing news," I stammered, a genuine smile finally breaking through the tension. "Thank you, Officer Rodriguez. Thank you for everything." "We just did our job," he said modestly. "But it was the community, the way everyone looked out for each other, that truly made a difference." We talked for a few minutes longer, a sense of closure settling over the conversation. As Officer Rodriguez rose to leave, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "You and Leo take care, all right?" he said, his voice sincere. "And hey, if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to call." "Thank you, officer," I said, a lump forming in my throat. "We will." Standing at the door as he left, a newfound sense of peace settled over me. The shadows that had loomed large over our lives seemed to recede a little further into the darkness. The ordeal had changed us, leaving scars both visible and invisible. But it had also forged a bond, a sense of community that transcended fear. As I called out to Leo that dinner was ready, the sound of his laughter echoing down the hallway filled me with a warmth that chased away the lingering chill. We were safe for now. And as long as we had each other and the watchful eyes of our little neighborhood, we would face any darkness that dared to creep in together. A year had passed since the unsettling events with the predator. The once vibrant fear in the neighborhood had softened into a cautious awareness. Security cameras remained silent sentinels, a constant reminder of the darkness they'd repelled. Leo, now a year older, was engrossed in a game of pirates with Mrs. Henderson's grandson in their backyard. Their playful shouts brought a smile to my face as I sat on the porch swing, a steaming mug of coffee warming my hands. Suddenly, a familiar car pulled up to the curb. It was Officer Rodriguez, but he wasn't in his usual uniform. He was in plain clothes, a friendly smile on his face. "Officer Rodriguez," I called out, surprised by the unexpected visit. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's great, mister. Your last name," he replied, stepping out of the car. "Just thought I'd drop by and say hello. Mind if I join you for a cup of coffee?" "Of course, come in," I said, ushering him towards the porch swing. "This is a nice surprise." As he settled in, his gaze drifted towards the backyard. "Looks like Leo's having fun." "He is," I replied, watching Leo and his friend chase each other with plastic swords. "He's grown so much since." Well, he has, Officer Rodriguez agreed, a hint of seriousness flickering in his eyes. That whole situation was tough on everyone, especially the kids. It definitely was, I said, taking a sip of coffee. But thanks to you and the community, things turned out well. Officer Rodriguez nodded. Speaking of the community, there's something I wanted to talk to you about. I set my mug down, a sliver of unease creeping in. Something wrong? Not exactly, he said, a reassuring smile returning. Remember the Neighborhood Watch program we discussed a while back? A vague memory stirred. Vaguely, we talked about starting something after. I trailed off, not wanting to revisit the dark chapter. Right, Officer Rodriguez said, understandingly. Well, the thing's calming down. We thought it might be a good time to revisit the idea. A proactive way to keep our neighborhood safe. My mind raced. The initial fear was still a raw wound, but the idea of being prepared, of having a plan, resonated with me. We're not talking about playing cops and robbers, Officer Rodriguez continued, sensing my hesitation. Just a group of concerned residents looking out for each other, sharing information, keeping an eye on things. I glanced towards Leo and his friend, their innocent laughter filling the air. The image solidified my resolve. We owed it to them, to our little haven, to be vigilant. All right, Officer Rodriguez, I said, meeting his gaze. Count me in. A genuine smile spread across his face. Great. We're having a meeting at the community center next week. Why don't you come along and see what it's all about? I will, I promised, a newfound sense of purpose settling in. The shadows may linger, but with a watchful community by our side, we were ready to face them, head on. The laughter of children once threatened, now echoed as a defiant song, a testament to the resilience of a neighborhood that had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. Together, the community center buzzed with nervous energy as residents filed in for the Neighborhood Watch program's first meeting. Faces I recognized from passing smiles and friendly waves mingled with others I didn't know as well. A sense of camaraderie, however tentative, filled the air. Officer Rodriguez stood at the front, a projector casting his silhouette on the wall. Welcome, everyone, he began, his voice warm and inviting. Thank you all for coming tonight. As many of you know, our neighborhood has faced some challenges in the past year. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. I stole a glance at Leo, who was perched on a chair next to me, doodling intently in his notebook, seemingly oblivious to the tension in the room. Thankfully, Officer Rodriguez continued, those challenges are behind us. But that doesn't mean we can be complacent. This program is about being proactive, about creating a network of watchful eyes and helping hands. He went on to explain the program's structure, outlining communication channels and patrol schedules. As he spoke, a wave of relief washed over me. This wasn't some vigilant group. It was a structured effort, led by a trusted officer, that empowered the community to be a part of the solution. Later, as residents broke into smaller groups for discussion, I found myself talking to Mrs. Henderson, a familiar warmth in her smile. This is a great idea, she said, her voice filled with enthusiasm. We can finally put those fancy security cameras to good use. Definitely, I agreed. But it's more than just cameras, Mrs. Henderson. It's about looking out for each other, being those extra eyes and ears. A young couple with a toddler joined our conversation, their faces etched with a mix of hope and apprehension. We're new here, the woman admitted shyly. We heard about what happened last year. It's a bit nerve-wracking. It's understandable, I said, placing a reassuring hand on her arm. But that's why this program is important. We're all in this together, and together we can make sure our neighborhood stays safe." The young woman offered a hesitant smile. "Thank you," she said. "That's good to hear." As the meeting wrapped up, a sense of unity filled the room. We were a diverse group, bound by a shared experience and a common goal: to protect our neighborhood, our families, and the sense of safety we all cherished. Walking out into the twilight with Leo's hand in mine, I looked up at the darkening sky. The shadows seemed less menacing tonight, a little less opaque. Perhaps it was the collective vigilance, the knowledge that we weren't alone. We had faced the darkness together, and in doing so, had found a strength we never knew we possessed. The night echoed with the comforting sounds of crickets chirping and children's laughter. It was a symphony of normalcy, a testament to the enduring spirit of a community that had chosen to stand together, ready to face whatever shadows may lurk in the future.